This is Walt Allen. Before I begin, I should inform all of you that this story does acknowledge the reality of death, and specifically the death of a prematurely born child. If these subjects are traumatic for you and too tough to listen to, you should keep that in mind. A long time ago, shortly before they invented fire, I began a residency program as a chaplain at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida, around 1995. That hospital had a reputation for its program as being grueling, tough, hard, because of the many hours of on-call duty that were required and the tough cases that came through. The reputation was earned. It was the only Level 1 trauma center for hundreds of miles, and the only hospital with certain kinds of high-level care units in a large area. One of those units was the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, where babies born prematurely are cared for until they are healthy enough to go home, or not. During one of my on-call weekends, I received a page around 2 or 3 in the morning to go to the NICU. The chaplain was needed to baptize a baby. This meant several things. Number 1, this baby was dying. It was not expected to live through the night, and the parents had requested that the chaplain come. Number 2, this was going to be the first time I had ever baptized anyone. Number 3, I had never seen a prematurely born baby, much less one that was dying. Number 4, I was a Baptist, and I was incredibly unfamiliar with how to baptize an infant, though I had been shown the process, but admittedly I wasn't paying attention when they showed it to me. Number 5, my wife and I were expecting our first child, and I was now all in my own head about it. And lastly, number 6, I was in some serious swamp grass, and I needed to get my head right because I didn't have much time to get to the baby because he didn't have much time to live. It's a good thing that it's a long walk from the room where I was not napping to the NICU, because it gave me time to babble at God incoherently. It turns out the parents were not there. They lived over 100 miles away and were called to go back to the hospital because the baby had taken a turn for the worse. They requested that the chaplain go ahead and baptize their son even before they got there, and for me not to wait for them, just in case. So it's just going to be him and me, I thought. God, I really feel alone right now, and I began to pray. I got to the unit, and with the help from one of the nurses, there were quite a few nurses. It is a very large NICU. I got scrubbed up and gowned up in accordance with the NICU rules, putting on all of the PPE. I gathered up my sterile water and sterile plastic seashell. They brought me in and led me to the child, laying in its bed, underneath the warming lamps. He was about the size of half a grapefruit. His eyes were bandaged because they were not fully formed yet, and the bright lights from the warming lamps would have been very painful without the bandages. I stared at this child underneath those warming lamps. I was overwhelmed at my responsibility for this child now at the hour of his death. What a sacred job I had. And so with shaky hands, and without trying to lift him, I baptized him by dipping my thumb in the water and crossing his forehead in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. I prayed out loud, and I don't remember what I prayed. And then I just kind of stared at him transfixed, wondering what could I do for this little boy who looked so alone on that big bed in that bright light. I felt kind of alone with him, not really knowing what I could do. Not only was I overwhelmed by this baby's lone suffering, I was overwhelmed as a chaplain, completely insufficient to the task, feeling small, alone, weak, and puny. Prayed that God would help this child. I was kind of surprised to find myself quietly weeping while I prayed. And after a while, feeling I had done all I could do, I lifted up my head and I turned around, and that's when I saw them. Every nurse in that unit, about 10 of them, had made a circle around the bed. I didn't even know they were there. And they were there the whole time, standing just out of my peripheral vision, and I had missed them all the time that I thought that I was alone, that the boy and I were alone. All of that time I am praying for God to help this baby and to help me. They were right there. gathered together for the sole purpose of being with this baby during his baptism. If I had needed help, or if the baby had needed help, we had only to ask, to call out. Help was right there. I'd love to tell you that this baby miraculously lived through the night and then grew stronger and grew up and became someone important. But he didn't. He died later that morning. But his parents did make it to the hospital in time to be with him. And a Catholic priest locally was called in and was able to be with them to administer last rites, which meant a lot to that family. I thought this baby was all alone without his parents being there, but it dawned on me. That child had not been alone for a single moment in his life, his entire existence. All he had known, as much as he could know, was being surrounded by an incredibly gifted, brave, and nurturing team of angels. And the same goes for me and for all of us, especially those people who are in hospitals right now being cared for angels wearing nurses' uniforms these days. But it's also true for all of us in a spiritual sense in that, well, as far as my beliefs go, God is never away from us. We are never left alone. We are always surrounded, but even more than in the spiritual sense, we have each other as humans in a very real human sense. We can get through this together. And if you feel lonely, and I mean in the pit lonely, lift up your head, look around, and maybe call out. Someone will hear, hopefully, but I promise you that there is a better chance that if you try and make your voice heard, someone will have a better chance of hearing you. We can be there for each other. All of those nurses were just outside of my peripheral vision. I didn't think they were there, but they were. And I'm willing to bet there are people all around you. If you feel you're lonely, they're just outside of your peripheral vision. Maybe someone is just outside of your peripheral vision. Maybe someone who needs you is just outside of your peripheral vision. I think for all of us as humans, we ought to all just look around a little more. Look around and see somebody today.